Good morning, everybody. This is Brian Frosch. First, I want to say thanks to everybody who is participating in the first meeting of our COVID-19 Access to Justice Task Force. We have a very distinguished group. There are too many of you for me to name everybody. Let me just say Rena Shaw and Judge Andre Davis are the vice chairs. We're extremely happy to have their able assistance and participation. And as you know, we have both of our U.S. senators and all but one of our members of the House of Representatives. I believe that the House and Senate are in session today, and they have representatives on the call with us. I want to tell you that what we expect to do today is to hear from the co-chairs of the 10 committees that we've created and charged with developing recommendations for our review and input. In the 4 weeks since we announced the formation of the task force, the co-chairs have been at work putting their teams together, developing some initial goals. And I want to thank them and the members of their committees for the work that you have already done in such a short amount of time. And we'll hear more about that in detail in a few minutes. We, I think, all share a sense of urgency about this work. I certainly, in my lifetime, our country has not been in greater turmoil. We haven't faced greater challenges, and the challenges that we face today, I think, are comparable to the worst crises that our country has ever faced, and they seem to be mounting in the middle of this terrible pandemic, with so many lives lost and so many people seriously ill. The justice crisis relating to policing has burst into flames as well. And the most obvious example, but by no means the only one, is the death of George Floyd, where we literally watched the life crushed out of him over an 8 to 9 minute period of time. And those problems are important. They need to be addressed immediately. It will not be the role of this task force to work on policing and criminal justice. And we have a very, very long agenda of civil justice issues that we will be addressing. And I'm hopeful that we will be able to come up with some improvements, some solutions to our civil justice system and the impact that the COVID-19 crisis has had upon it. We know that the impact of this pandemic has been greatest upon in communities of color. African American, Latinx families have significantly higher death rates from COVID-19 than the rest of us. And the frontline workers, the least paid people in our state and country, are the ones who are becoming ill at a more rapid pace than the rest of us. And they are predominantly or disproportionately people of color. So I'd like, just in the beginning, to make a call to action. You are all leaders and experts in your fields. I hope that you will use your voices and your platforms to help us build an army of pro bono lawyers that we're going to need to help Marylanders navigate the post-COVID-19 civil legal landscape. We know people are trying to help, and we believe that they'll lead to better outcomes we know that people who are in our legal system do much, much better if they have legal representation. And there is a huge need for lawyers to provide that representation now and over the coming months. In the same vein, we desperately need legal aid funding, which has been drastically reduced. So again, I hope the leadership represented on this task force will encourage our elected officials that a significant portion of our state CARES Act money will be spent on legal representation, legal assistance. The need is overwhelming. It's immediate. I thank you so much for your commitment to this effort. And I'm now going to turn it over to our Vice Chair, Rena Shaw, who will give a brief overview and begin the committee presentations. After those presentations, we'll be looking forward to your feedback, your questions. Rena, why don't you take it away?
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Attorney General Frosch. I'm going to present a screen and do a PowerPoint. So thank you everyone for joining, and I would also like to thank you all for the amount of work and effort and your agreement to be on this commission. I am going to, sorry about that, present. So again, we're very thankful for this partnership with the Maryland Attorney General's Office, the Maryland Access to Justice Commission. As the Attorney General mentioned, we exist because we know that the civil legal needs of people, not only there have been new challenges created by COVID-19, but existing challenges have been exacerbated. And the scale and magnitude is something that we have not seen before. And all the, many of the issues that the civil justice system deals with is directly tied to public health and economic recovery and equity, all of the things that we care about. So the key goals of this task force are to deal with these civil legal issues that have been created or exacerbated. We want to ensure that Marylanders remain housed and fed and safe and secure and connected, although we are aware that many already are not connected or may not be housed. And then we want to connect the outcomes of what happens in the civil justice system very publicly to public health, the pandemic recovery, and economic growth. For the task force itself and all the work that's happening in the committees, we have an overarching focus on equity. We know, as the Attorney General said, that there are disproportionate impact on communities and people of color, and that the civil justice system intersects with these people more and may be reinforcing harms in these communities more. So this task force overall has a focus on equity. It also has a focus on transparency. So all meetings of the task force will be open to public observation. Questions or comments from the public are accepted in writing. This meeting, as you know, is recorded and will be shared or available to view. And anyone who wants to join any meeting of the task force, including committee meetings, can email this email address, which is available on the website. The task force does have a website, and so this is where you would go as task force members or members of the advisory committee to get the up-to-date information on the meetings that are scheduled and what each committee is doing. In terms of task force structure, you all are aware that we have an advisory committee that's composed of our congressional delegation. We have task force members, we have committees, and now we also have subcommittees. So there's a deep bench of people working on these important issues. In terms of timeline, our public launch was in June, on June 11th. We are expecting a final report of this task force in December of this year. And we expect to have three meetings, such as this one. The first one is today. We will have one in September and one in November. And the committees and subcommittees are meeting weekly or bi-weekly already. The committee composition, we have been very intentional in the first few weeks in this phase to focus on diversity and ensure that our committees are composed with leaders from diverse backgrounds, diverse viewpoints, and have geographic diversity. Currently, we have over 230 people who have joined our committees from over 130 unique organizations from across the state. We do also have committee support. We want to thank both the University of Maryland and the University of Baltimore Law Schools. They have created fellowships for their students to join the Access to Justice Corps, COVID Access to Justice Corps. So we have 10 students who are supporting each of our committees. Not 10 students supporting each, but 10 students, one per committee. We have 40 attorneys from the Attorney General's office who are volunteering to support the committee efforts as well. We have one full-time staff of the Access to Justice Commission, and we have in-kind support from the MSBA, who enables the work of the Access to Justice Commission. And we're thankful for all of these partners coming together to support these efforts. In terms of the committees, you'll be hearing from the committees today, and they will be giving their reports. But I just wanted to explain briefly how these committees are interacting with each other. We have substantive committees. There are 6 of them, and each focused on a particular substantive area, including funding, housing, economic and food security, consumer issues, abuse and neglect, and life and health planning. We also have some support or implementation committees. We expect that some of the recommendations coming out of the substantive committees may require this information or this support. And so we've created support committees to help. And there's one on data and legal technology, on pro bono and reduced fee legal services, and one on public awareness and community engagement. And those committees themselves have their own sort of peoples that have come on board to support the work of the substantive committees. We also have one overarching committee, which is the Policy and Race Equity Committee. So the co-chairs of all the committees meet and report to the Policy and Race Equity Committee. And this is to make sure that not only is all the work coming out of the task force cohesive, but that we're also applying this race equity lens and equity in general when we are viewing the work. And so this is one step, a committee that sort of overarches all the other committees. In terms of today's presentations, we are going to allow each committee to present, as the Attorney General said, the key problems that they have identified and their proposed solutions that they're discussing in the committee or they're recommending. We ask that everyone hold their questions until the end. We will have a discussion period after all the committee presentations, but we do want to make sure that all the committees have a chance to present. If you do have a question and you think you might forget it, or you want to make sure that it is heard, you can include it in the chat. And so we will be monitoring the chat feature throughout, and you can hold it there and we can bring it up again when it's time for discussion. So at this time, I would like to hand it over to our first committee, and that is the Attorney General's office. She'll be presenting. Thanks, Anita.
Good morning. As Rena said, my name is Anita Hurley, and I am Chief Counsel for Civil Rights in the Office of the Attorney General. It's my pleasure to serve as co-chair of the Policy and Equity Committee, along with Judge Davis and Rena Shaw. The Attorney General recognized early on that we must be intentional and transparent in our commitment to developing recommendations for reform through a racial equity lens. And as Rena mentioned, the Policy and Equity Committee brings together all of the co-chairs from the other 9 committees in support of this effort, and also to allow for some cross-pollination of their ideas and expertise. As an initial goal, just as we work hard to ensure that the members of the task force were included representatives of the communities most impacted by COVID-19 and other structural inequities, we are applying that same philosophy to the committees. And the committees have worked diligently over the past few weeks toward this end. The experts and the practitioners that they have brought together represent not only racial, ethnic, and gender diversity, but also geographical and viewpoint diversity as well. Last week, I led an exercise with the committee co-chairs where we applied a series of racial equity impact assessment questions to one of the proposals from the Life and Health Planning Committee. We discussed strategies for identifying and engaging impacted stakeholders, as well as for documenting structural inequities. And we know that data and community engagement are going to be critical to this work. And so we're excited to have teams that are focused on these areas to be able to assist us in this effort. We've charged the committees with using these questions throughout their work so that considerations of equity and impact can remain at the forefront of the committee's work. And as we work to identify the communities that have been or are disproportionately impacted by any particular problem, we're also going to be working to confirm that that community is represented at the table and participating in developing any solutions. Now, the racial equity impact assessment questions is just one of the tools that we hope to use. We are working on identifying other resources and experts that can assist us in this work. We know that some of you are already and have done this work in your respective organizations, and we encourage you to come and talk to the co-chairs about your experiences as well as the strategies that you have successfully employed. And so if you're interested in working with us on this effort, please reach out to me. We'll make sure to put you on the agenda so that you can share those experiences. I am excited about the conversations that are already starting to happen in the committees, but I know that if we're going to have a chance to dismantle structural racism or other structural inequities, then we have to use our collective intent and attention to this matter. And so I strongly urge all of you to provide your candid feedback today as the other committee co-chairs present, and to continue providing that feedback throughout the process. I will also be monitoring the chat room. And so to the extent that you all have questions that are relevant to this work that I can easily answer, then I will certainly do my best to do it in the chat as well. So thank you again for your time and your commitment to this important work. We look forward to working with you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Now I'd like to hand it over to Susan Ehrlichman and who are co-chairs of our Civil Legal Aid Funding Committee.
Thank you, Rena. I have the privilege of co-chairing this committee with Kathy Bledsoe from the AG's office, and we really appreciate the opportunity to let you know why we exist and what we're doing about that. Our purpose, the Civil Legal Aid Funding Committee, is to identify and secure new sustainable funding to stabilize and expand revenue to meet the growing and unprecedented need for civil legal aid that's resulted from the COVID-19 pandemic. Unfortunately, the pandemic has also taken a hit on Maryland's primary funding source for legal aid, and Attorney General Frosch referenced the loss in funding we've already experienced because of the pandemic. Two of the major funding sources for Maryland Legal Services Corporation have decreased dramatically. The first being filing fee surcharge revenue as a result of the unnecessary court closures over the past few months. The Maryland Legal Services Corporation saw a decrease of $2.3 million in anticipated revenue just from March through June. That necessitated a 9% decline in the grant level that the Board of Directors made for the year we just started, for fiscal year 21. So unfortunately, we are starting at a deficit, and for the coming year, we anticipate the other funding source that has taken a tremendous hit is our interest on lawyer trust accounts program, where we had projected $6.5 million for this current year. We're now projecting $2 million. So we're looking at, as I think all of you know, we are now in a near zero interest rate environment, again, very much like the Great Recession. So we have our work cut out for us, but we're already well underway. And I wanted to speak with you briefly about the activities that we've already undertaken. So the funding committee had held its first meeting on June 24th. We identified short and long-term goals. The short-term goal is to determine how to secure CARES Act funding, as the Attorney General mentioned, and also other federal funds for civil legal aid. And the long-term goal, which really is not that long-term because we need to do that pretty quickly as well, is to find sustainable funding sources to replace the lost revenue I just described and meet the increased demand for civil legal aid. And we anticipate that will primarily be through legislative initiatives. So to address the short-term goal, the committee formed a CARES Act subcommittee that held its first meeting yesterday, a very productive meeting where we developed an action plan. Time is certainly of the essence in this regard because money that is secured under the CARES Act and significant dollars have been sent to throughout the nation under this funding initiative. The $2.3 billion has come to the state of Maryland, with $1.6 billion of that being reserves for state funding and the rest going to major counties. But the money under this initiative must be spent by the end of this calendar year. So we are leaping into action, and we are going to start developing a media campaign, including an op-ed piece that hopefully will be placed very, very soon, to make clear that not only is it appropriate to use CARES Act money for legal aid, that it is essential to use CARES Act money in the recovery effort when you are looking at dealing with the fallout from COVID-19. Legal aid providers are essential frontline providers in the recovery, and we need to make sure that that is communicated throughout the state, both to our state officials and our county and local officials. So towards that end, another initiative that the subcommittee is recommending is that a letter be sent from the task force to every county executive, making clear that indeed their plans for COVID recovery under the CARES Act should definitely include funding for legal aid, and to also help them effectuate that funding, whether it be communicating with them, the legal aid providers in their state, or being a conduit for that funding for the legal aid providers. The subcommittee also recommended developing a statewide eviction prevention proposal that would be presented to our state representatives and to have this ready, because one of the major things and the first thing we must do is to figure out what the process is to access the CARES Act funding. It has been very difficult, and there is no public process to be able, at least from the state, the money that is sitting with the state, to access these funds. So members of our subcommittee have already reached out and contacted folks from the Office of Budget Management so we can get started on that. So that's what we have done thus far. I am very honored and excited to continue this important work. I'd like to just ask my co-chair, Kathy, if there's anything she'd like to add at this time.
I think you covered all the bases, Susan. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank all the members of the committee, and we look forward to continuing this work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan, for that presentation. Now I want to hand it over to Zafar Shah and Zach Shirley, who are the co-chairs of the Housing Security Committee.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Zach Shirley. I'm a senior civil attorney in the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit of the AG's office, and I'm co-chairing the Housing Security Committee. I'm going to start this morning just by explaining some background on on the scope of our work, and then I'm going to turn it over to my co-chair, Zafar, to give more specific updates on our work. When we initially looked at the potential for housing issues as a result of COVID-19, we were struck by the scope and the diversity of those issues. There were different issues faced by the population of renters in Maryland versus homeowners. There was obviously some overlap in those issues, but there were also some issues that were entirely unique. So keeping that in mind as we populated the committee, we tried to find people who had expertise, both, I mean, obviously the general expertise in housing, but also people who might be able to kind of drill down and focus on one of those two populations. We decided, given the incredible urgency of some of the issues that renters especially were facing with the impending end of the moratorium on evictions that could hit, I guess, as early as the week after next, that we really needed to divide our work into 3 phases so that we could hit those immediate issues straight away. And so phase 1, we're focused on evictions, rental assistance, and issues with regard to late fees. A lot of issues faced by renters, because when that moratorium ends, there's going to be a whole lot of issues that are going to be very front of mind for a large number of Marylanders. So then once we have addressed those immediate concerns, phase 2, we will look at the court process, because of the tidal wave of evictions that we foresee in the courts. There's a tremendous backlog of eviction actions. There's going to be a real busy docket, and we're not entirely certain how the courts intend to handle that. But we want to ensure that, one, courts handle it in a way that is that addresses the needs of Marylanders, and that is that is informed by the expertise on our committee. But at the same time, we want to make sure that, however the courts choose to address that docket, that the people that are going to be in the system are going to have access to legal assistance. This may be some kind of pro bono program or low bono program, but we want to ensure that there's guidance for people who find themselves in the middle of an eviction proceeding. And then finally, phase 3, these are the longer term legislative goals. And here we're going to broaden the scope, because we realize that when it comes to changing policy and legislative goals, a lot of the problems that COVID-19 has caused in the housing world are not problems that did not pre-exist COVID. They were brought into stark relief by this crisis, but they pre-existed it. So here we're going to expand the scope and look at some broader policy issues, and we're going to include homelessness, because some of the issues that we're seeing with the COVID-19 pandemic is not just related to people with houses, but also people without houses. It's a public health crisis. So we will expand the scope with regard to the populations we're looking at when we get to phase 3, and we talk about potential legislative action. Finally, I just want to say we split our committee into subcommittees. Like I said, we tried to populate the committee with expertise in different areas. So we've then tried to populate the subcommittees so that they can really drill down on, for instance, we have a subcommittee on renters issues. So for committee members with a specific interest in renters issues, they can gravitate into that subcommittee and really focus on those issues. We have the same for housing issues, like homeowner issues, and then finally one to deal with homelessness and public health that we mentioned in phase 3. I'm going to send it over to Zuffer to give some more specific examples.
Rita, how much time left do we have for this segment?
You have about 1.5 minutes, Zuffer.
Okay, I'll be brief. So I'm Zuffer Shah, attorney at the Public Justice Center. Thanks, Zach, for giving the framework of our work. I wanted to emphasize too that at the outset of the housing security meeting, we did have an intentional conversation about what housing security means to us, and out of that conversation did come that illuminating point about homelessness, but also the need to address the health role that housing plays, and to ensure that whatever proposals our committee makes do squarely address public health among the economic and legal crises that tenants and homeowners and others will face. Where we are right now, where we're headed in sort of the stage 1 and stage 2 of our work is really to provide input to Attorney General Frosh and to the public about how changes to the eviction process can help maximize the availability and effectiveness of financial assistance, both to homeowners and to property owners and to tenants We're trying to formulate ideas to address information deficits among litigants. That's not only a conversation about right to counsel and providing legal assistance, but also simply know your rights information that could be useful at settlement conferences, that might be precursors to trials for repossession. We're discussing language access issues, as well as some of the technology and other due process barriers that remote hearings may make real in people's lives after the eviction moratorium. Data and leveraging our committee to get data and to share data about the court process and the impact of eviction is another key concern. So I'll wrap up there, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Zach and Zephyr. I'm going to now hand it over to the Economic and Food Security Committee, who are co-chaired by Carno Evans and Paul Gazella.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Carno Evans. I'm an in-house attorney at Marriott International, and on behalf of Paul Cucuzella with the AG's office, who could not join us today, I'm happy to tell you a little bit about what the Economic and Food Security Committee has been up to. For those of you who don't know, our committee's purview covers a range of public benefit programs, including unemployment insurance, food-related security programs like SNAP, and monetary programs like TAMP, which provide temporary cash assistance to those in need. We have organized ourselves into two different subcommittees, which are comprised of several experts in who practice in these areas on a regular basis. All of those subcommittees have now met and have come up with some very preliminary findings as to the path that we think we should pursue to best recommend some changes to the status quo. One thing you've heard, I think, first from Attorney General Frosch and others is that there's been a demand for civil legal aid services for some time. COVID-19 didn't create this demand. This predated COVID, but COVID has certainly exacerbated the demand. And what we're hearing from the folks on our committees who have lived experience is that having an attorney navigate these processes for them is invaluable. So the question is, both on a short-term and long-term basis, how best do we get access for as many people as possible to those services? I don't want to repeat Susan Ehrlichman's terrific presentation, but I think our number one priority is funding for civil legal aid providers. As a short-term matter, securing CARES Act funding would be really helpful in addressing not only the pre-existing backlog, but the backlog created by COVID-19. Finding a longer-term, more sound structural model that allows funding for some of these providers is the way we're going to address this going forward, because I don't think we're going to get back to a situation where we have less demand as opposed to more. So funding, we think, is critical, and that's what we're hearing from our folks on our committees as to what gets them the best outcome. The second thing our committee is focusing on is education and outreach. One of the other things we're hearing from folks on our committees is that people who are applying for these benefits, particularly first-time filers for these benefits, don't know what to do, and they don't know where to go to get information on what to do. I think what we'd like to propose ultimately is a series of educational materials that would be accessible from multiple different media, and that would sort of guide folks through the processes of how they apply for these benefits and how they access them, keeping in mind that we want to be conscious of any barriers to access, whether that be lack of internet access, foreign language requirements, disabilities that would limit folks from accessing these materials in certain ways. So education on how to access benefits is we think also critical. There are some good models out there that have been started by some of the civil legal aid providers. There is, for example, a hotline for SNAP and food stamp application that was created by the Homeless Persons Representation Project. And that's the model that we're looking at. And some of these may be government created, some of them may be privately created. But we think there are ways to get information out there to folks who are saying, we don't really know how to navigate this process. Finally, the third part of our focus is on the programs themselves and working with the agencies that administer them to figure out how do we eliminate any structural barriers to get folks access to the services that they need. A lot of this focuses on communication, and some of it is access, and sort of dovetailing with the prior education component. We think that there are certain barriers that can reasonably easily be addressed, and so we're looking at each of those in our subcommittees, and things like where benefits have to be applied for over the web or via phone. If you don't have internet access, and there's a backlog of folks trying to apply by phone, is there a third medium that we could try to employ to get folks easier access? Are there foreign language requirements that are eliminating people from being able to access this information? So looking at structural barriers and trying to figure out exactly what is keeping folks from applying is sort of our third charge. But thanks everyone, and that's what we've been up to.
Carno, thank you so much for that presentation. I'm now going to hand it over to Marceline White and Steve Sakamoto-Wengel from the Consumer Protection Committee.
Thanks, Rena, and thanks everybody. Steve Sakamoto-Wengel with the Consumer Protection Division of the Attorney General's Office. And I'm pleased to be able to chair the Consumer Protection Committee with Marceline White, the Executive Director of the Maryland Consumer Rights Coalition, who's also a member of the task force. And I guess, Marceline, let me start, and then you can weigh in if I miss anything. There are a whole lot of consumer issues that have arisen out of the COVID-19 crisis. But we thought the focus should be on debt collection issues because that's one area where we really think there is going to be a crisis. And there are a lot of parallels between consumer debt collection and what was described by the Housing Committee. You've got people out there who, because of job losses and income losses and other expenses, are not able to pay their bills. And some of them are, just falling deeper into debt. Many of them are already deep in debt. Some of them are borrowing to try to keep up. Many of them are borrowing from predatory lenders. And even though there might be some relief that was provided under the CARES Act and through unemployment insurance, many in the immigrant community are not eligible or are reluctant to apply for that type of relief. So like housing, while those killing to keep up and to move things along, we think things are going to be even worse. Recognize that many debtors don't recognize if they have defenses to a debt collection action. A substantial majority don't show up for hearings. There are a lot of affidavit judgments that are able to be issued, without having a full trial. And some of those were even issued while the courts were closed. Those, we understand, have been vacated, but we also have heard anecdotally that some of those that were supposed to have been vacated have not been. And also, once judgments are entered, people face garnishment of their wages and what little assets they have, and are also become subject to debt relief scams that put them in a deeper hole than they were to begin with. So we assembled a committee of both private attorneys as well as legal services providers who practice in the debt collection area. We also have folks from organizations that do deal with consumers who are facing debt, like CCCS of Maryland, the Better Business Bureau, Maryland Consumer Rights Coalition, Cash Campaign of Maryland, and we also have representation from the creditors bar on our committee. And we have decided also to break it down into 4 subcommittees. One, which seems to be a common thread, is dealing with consumer education and letting consumers know what resources are available out there, hopefully that they can take advantage of those resources before they get sued. Let them know that there are defenses available, that there are resources available, the court self-help program, organizations like MVLS. We do believe that having access to counsel would be, we're not quite sure that that's going to happen anytime soon. Also looking at whether some kind of mediation would be helpful, hopefully not just sending them into a room to talk, but having some kind of mediator, whether there are notices that can be given to get sued or when they get sued to let them know about available resources, then what changes might be necessary to court procedures. So those are the areas that we're focused on, both short-term and long-term. So Marceline, did you want to add anything?
Steve, thanks so much. I think you did a great job covering the broad landscape of issues. I would just briefly say that we are looking at and talking about things like the HOPE hotline that was established under the former administration, so that there'd be a statewide effort to provide information to people, and looking at things like notices of access to help that could go into something like a notice of intention to defend. So when somebody's being pursued by a debt collector, they have immediate, clear, accessible access to ways to get help from low bono or pro bono attorneys. We are developing short and long-term solutions and looking at the issue of the digital divide when we're talking about online dispute resolution and other issues, and being very cognizant of that. So thanks, I'll end there.
Thank you so much to both Steve and Marceline for their hard work. We know that there are a lot of committees here. You can see the depth of work that's happening. We are about halfway through our committees, so I ask you all to be patient, and we have 5 excellent other committees coming up. So I'm going to pass it over now to the Surviving Abuse, Neglect, and Exploitation Committee that is headed by Delegate Bartlett and Shelley Mintz. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rena. This committee, Surviving Abuse, Neglect, and Exploitation committee is huge, as you would imagine, huge in the task. Big thanks to co-chair Shelley Mintz from the AG's office, and to Laura Opont, our law clerk. She has been invaluable. So our committee's scope is to look at the key issues of concerns that have been created or exacerbated by the pandemic with respect to people who are in the midst of surviving abuse, neglect, and or exploitation. So the biggest common theme that we met was the unknown. It's the unknown because individuals who are in vulnerable populations cannot go through their normal or their usual avenues, and therefore they cannot be identified as easily. So cases of abuse, neglect, and or exploitation go without identification. And those individuals who usually perform evaluations or provide resources or oversight are not allowed person-to-person contact due to the visitation restrictions. And people, because our children are not in schools, they are not being seen by the professionals that they usually are seen by. And so those professionals are at a disadvantage and are unable to detect abuse and neglect and report. Attorneys cannot get to the elderly or vulnerable adults to review documents, and therefore there's a level of coercion by someone who may live in the home or may be a home or family caretaker. And the as we know, attorneys cannot go into the nursing homes. And then people whose revenue solely comes from donations, people who live on the street or who are soliciting donations from other avenues, they're hurting because donations at this time are extremely low, and or there's not as much traffic. If you are someone who obtain your income from the kind donation of individuals on the street, guardianships cases are at issue, and because the guardians can't go into court and check on those who are seeking guardianship. Restricted housing in the prisons, in the prison system is at issue because someone who has SMI, a serious mental illness, their conditions are unknown because of lack of access. So we have 5 committees: reporting committee, existing services, what we call the donut hole, meaning those services that don't exist but should, data and civil proceedings. And so I'm going to turn it over to my very ample co-chair, Shelley Mintz, and she's going to talk to you about our short-term and goals and what we're doing there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have been very, very frequently, and Delegate Bartlett is fast becoming my new BFF. We've had meetings virtually daily with our subcommittees and with the committee as a whole. And what has resulted is we have defined a very, very broad population whose vulnerability to abuse, neglect, or exploitation has increased, taken on new forms, and new groups that have now been impacted. As a result of the pandemic, we really need to better define exactly how these at-risk populations are being impacted. We're very fortunate that we have members on our committee, really all of our members, who are really front line people dealing with abuse, neglect, and exploitation. And what we have decided to do in order to address all of these groups is to begin by putting together a survey or surveys of both service providers and recipients of services to determine where and how COVID-19 has exacerbated or created risks of abuse, neglect, and exploitation, and how well those risks, realization of those has been. We know that we have reporting issues, reports of child abuse, elder abuse, all forms of abuse. Domestic violence have significantly decreased, and we believe that that is because the sources for reporting have not been as available or as well known, and those who would normally make the reports are now not there, such as schools, the ombudsman. People are trapped essentially in isolation with their potential abusers in this new era we're in. We want to move beyond the anecdotal, and we are combining the skills of our committee members involved in direct services to the various populations concerning us with the know-how for combining the substantive knowledge of service providers with the capability of the researchers to ask the right question, put it into a user-friendly form for a survey, collate the data, and derive data-driven proposals to resolve the problems revealed by the data. We have already, just with the anecdotal information, identified certain issues to go to the legislature, such as adult protective service registries, strengthening our oversight through the ombudsman, and we are identifying those issues. We hope to have these surveys completed and out to our stakeholders by the end of this month, the beginning of August. Of all the data, assess the results into a usable form, and we will then be able to do an evidence-based, we hope, crafting of our long-term resolutions of how during times of isolation we can ensure that people, including unfortunately children, the elderly, are able to have their voices heard.
Thank you so much, Shelley. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Delegate Bartlett, for your report. I'm now going to pass it over to Juliana Bell and Danielle Cruddenden from the Life and Health Planning Committee.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Lena. Our committee is looking to make sure we increase access to important life and health care planning documents. The crisis, the COVID-19 health crisis, has spotlighted the need for these important documents, and these documents will significantly assist individuals in accessing the care and the benefits that they need. You know, advanced medical directives are important for those that are in a hospital and need surrogates to help with making critical healthcare decisions and carry out end-of-life decisions. People that are hospitalized or in nursing homes for long periods of time are going to need financial powers of attorney so that their bills can be paid, the rent can be paid, there's access to their funds. And in this regard, we see that this work of this committee will help to support the other committees in carrying out their work in getting access to civil justice, getting access to housing needs and benefits. People that are hospitalized and can't get out are going to need someone else to carry out those tasks for them. Using a power of attorney will assist in that regard. And there's also a need, sadly, to have wills in place to make sure that people who die from the virus are able to make sure that the ones they leave behind are cared for. Demographic research has shown that Blacks, Browns, and seniors in lower income brackets are statistically less likely to have possession of these important documents. And so it is when there is access provided to these documents and education on the benefits and the use of using documents such as this that we see an increase in the possession of forms. So our committee will be working to make sure that we are providing resources. Immediately, we are working on providing a resource directory that will be available that identifies places for individuals to contact to get pro bono or low bono services or access to an attorney to help them in getting these important documents in place, or assisting families who have lost a loved one in navigating the probate system. Our short-term goal is being carried out by a resource development committee. We also have a midterm goal of making sure we are distributing resources through community outreach with other partner organizations. We hope to provide or engage in a public awareness campaign through our partnering with other organizations. And we hope to identify legislative changes that will result in more funding and improved resources and accessibility to life and health planning at low or no cost to individuals. And one more thing on a legislative front, having these documents executed has proved difficult during the pandemic because these documents need to be witnessed in person. We have an executive order or executive orders in place that allow remote witnessing and notarization. We will look to work legislatively with others. We'll ratify that legislation so that we can have certainty that the documents that people are signing will be in fact valid when the documents are needed. I'm going to turn it over to my co-chair, Juliana Bell, who will talk more about how we are going to implement our goals.
Thank you, Danielle, and I'll be brief. I'm aware that our time is about up, Rena, but let me just say that in our midterm goal setting, we're looking to move from digital distribution of the resources that Danielle just talked about to distribution through partner organizations and if possible, at their locations, as well as properly socially distanced in-person events. We'll be working through what we call credible partners. And those are partners that will help us reach populations most affected by COVID in ways that both resonate with them and are useful to them. So we've started in some subcommittee, the Community Outreach Subcommittee, that is focusing on that work. I think my time is up, Rena, but I'll just say that we're still actively seeking faith leader representation. Reverend Huber, if you're still on the call, maybe you could help us out with that for that committee, as well as some individuals from the local commissions on aging who can help us focus that outreach work. We look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juliana and Danielle, for that presentation and for being mindful of the time. I would like now to pass it over to our Data and Legal Technology Committee, which is headed by Matthew Stubenberg and
Wendy.
I'm blanking. I'm so sorry, Wendy. Thank you, Matthew.
Hi, everybody. I'm Matthew Stubenberg, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Data and Legal Technology Committee. And we've been tasked with acquiring, sharing, and analyzing data related to access to justice in the courts, especially as they reopen, and providing information on how the reopening is going, which populations are being affected by that. And in particular, we're looking at court operations and the barriers that people face, especially when it comes to technology and accessing the courts. So we've broken our committee into 3 subcommittees. We have a data subcommittee, a technology barrier committee, and then a court operation committee. So the data committee is specifically pulling data related to things like court filings, the number of filings, outcome metrics, how many, what's the average default judgment for a debt collection case? Is that more or less than it was last year at about this time? How many eviction filings are there? Are the evictions, are there more people being evicted per caseload than there were this time last year? So we can keep an eye on where some of these hotspots and trouble areas are. And one of the main things we're trying to do is create a dashboard that will pull this information in real time. We're currently just in one moment of time, and things, as we all know, are rapidly going to change and modify as people adapt to this kind of new situation that we live in. And we need to be able to spot trends quickly and not months later. And so we're hoping to have a dashboard that will be able to capture some of these analytics so that everyone will have access to them and will be able to spot some of these issues. For the technology barriers subcommittee, they're looking at what impacts Maryland residents when it comes to technology. Which counties have limited access to internet? Are the internet speeds in certain counties not sufficient for remote court operations or for the remote technologies like Zoom and Skype? Are there different technologies that work better in counties that have low internet speed? And then not just in the county, are there specific zip codes that have particular issues that need to be addressed? The other two big areas for technology barriers are technology adoption. What technology does the average Marylander have? And then how big is that group of the average Marylander consist of? Where are some of the issues in smartphones, laptops, printers, scanners? What can people adequately do with the technology they have at home versus what they can't? And then technology skills. Technology skills is really important. You can have all the technology in the world, but if you're unable to use it, you're unable to log on and actually access that court hearing, all the technology is not going to do you any good. So we have several members of that subcommittee reviewing a lot of the information around that to come up with a report of what's possible. And then with court operations, that subcommittee is looking at not only what the Maryland court system is currently doing and currently planning in terms of remote operations, but also what other courts and states are doing nationwide to see if somebody has already tried something and if they have preliminary results and it might be worth trying here. And so we're trying to think outside the box, and especially in some of these areas that might face technology barriers. Is there a particular technology that has worked in another state that we might try to implement here? So I'll yield the rest of my time. Wendy, do you have anything to add? I'll take that as a no.
Take it as a no. Technology, just turning off the mute button. But no, our goal is to also talk about ways we can make the courts more accessible to people who don't have access currently.
Thank you so much to both Matthew and Wendy for that presentation. I'm now going to hand it over to Guy Flynn and Hannibal Kemmerer, who are the heads of our pro bono and reduced fee legal services committee. Thank you.
Well, hello, everyone. This is Guy Flynn. I'm leader in the Baltimore office for DLA Piper, and I'm very happy to get the call about a week and a half ago or so from the Office of the Attorney General to co-chair this committee with my good friend now. We've established a very close and good working relationship in just this week, Hannibal Kemmerer of the Attorney General's office. And we've also gotten just tremendous support and ideas from Carlene Databo, who is a law student at the University of Baltimore School of Law. So our committee had its first meeting 2 days ago. And I must say that we have stood up in a very short period of time an amazing committee, including members of the private law firm bar, leaders within various pro bono organizations throughout the state, people from the law schools, and other community leaders. And so in our meeting, we really wanted to do a couple of things. Number one, really avail ourselves of the talent, ideas, and intelligence on the ground data that people on the committee are seeing, and to really marshal their collective resources and ideas to help inform what our mission is going to be as a committee. One of the real ideas that we intend to do, and probably our top goal, is to mobilize the private bar to really join this effort that all of you who have spoken thus far in your substantive committees have identified, which is the coming tsunami, if not existing tsunami, of pro bono need. And so we think that the law firms can really step up here and play a big role. And we know that some lawyers have additional capacity now given the after effects of the pandemic. And so our top mission is to really make sure that we can stand up an army of lawyers who can fill this need that we know is upon us for pro bono help. And I've been a longtime board member of Maryland Legal Aid, and I know that Wilhelm Joseph is on this call. And so we know that there is an existing infrastructure called the Equal Justice Council that has existed to fundraise among the private bar. And so we intend to use that existing infrastructure to be able to maximize and motivate the private bar and each of the law firms and the managing partners of the law firms to really join this effort. We also are going to have participation by the law school deans who are also on this call, because we believe there's an opportunity to engage law students in this effort. Retired partners, retired judges, etc. So we're going to stand up this army of lawyers so that we can fulfill the needs that all of you have identified. We're very focused on diversity, not only in the background of the committee members and the people who are going to provide pro bono and low bono services, but we heard in our meeting 2 days ago from people who live in different areas of the state. For example, the Eastern Shore, there's a real need in pockets of the state for emergent pro bono services. So we are very focused on the idea of geographic diversity, as well as the populations who are traditionally underserved, for whom that underservice has been pronounced by the pandemic. And so we will be working with all of the various affinity bar association organizations in the state so that we can make sure we're not leaving any subpopulations behind. And then beyond that, we do expect to do some ideating, if you will, among our committee to come up with ideas of our own that we think will help alleviate the pressure of the pandemic in this pro bono sense. One idea that my co-chair Hannibal can speak to is we've thought about trying to raise the target pro bono hours that the Court of Appeals has set by maybe as much as 50%, so that we can incent lawyers to be able to do additional pro bono and to be recognized for that, and to have the weight of the judiciary behind elevating those targets. So those are some of the things we've been working on. We will be meeting at a pretty rapid cadence here, and we are breaking into subcommittees to meet the needs, and we are going to be liaising with all of the substantive committees that have presented here today, so that we're being informed in real time by your work and that we're able to address your issues. So Hannibal, if I've left anything out, please jump in.
That was a perfect summary, and I don't need to elaborate. Thank you so much, Guy. It's been a pleasure working with you, and Rena and all the others.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Guy, and thank you, Hannibal, for that presentation. We are to our last committee report. I'm going to hand it over to Karen Anderson-Scott and Franklin Baker from the Public Awareness and Community Engagement Committee.
Good morning, excuse me. Good morning, everyone. As Rena indicated in the beginning, we're here basically to support the work of the other task force committees. And really, the bottom line is for us to get the word out about the task force, civil legal rights of constituents that have been impacted by the COVID virus, and what they're making sure that they have access to the courts and that they're represented, and so that they know that these resources are out there to assist them. So what we have talked about is we have one of the first things we talked about moving forward is that we would like, as Mr. Flynn just talked about, we wanted to connect with the other committees. So far, one other committee has connected with us in terms of public awareness, and we would like to liaise with all committees so that way we are all working in concert. We're presenting a consistent message about the task force and the resources that are available to constituents. And that way we're not all kind of acting independently and duplicating work. We just felt it's a better use of resources if we're all working together. We have been talking about ways in which we're going to get the message out to the public and the constituents and stakeholders. And we have discussed the fact that, one, not everybody does have internet access, or not everybody is online. Everybody's not tech savvy or doesn't operate in the digital sphere. So we have discussed, and we are looking at how we can keep the public engaged and keep the public aware in the age of COVID, and how do we reach constituents that don't have access to technology. We've discussed having traditional media, print media, TV, and radio play to get the word out. We also have discussed social media, obviously. There is a website for the committee, for the task force, and we have discussed having town hall meetings. Right now, we're talking virtually because, everything's still closed, but we are talking about having town hall meetings. We did discuss having them virtually, and we also talked about having regional meetings. That way we are reaching people in Western Maryland, Frederick, people on the shore, people in Southern Maryland, as well as Central Maryland. And we also discussed that we possibly would need interpreters for having those meetings, so that we do reach, if we have someone part of the disability community that's hearing impaired, that there could be an interpreter, a sign language interpreter, so that we can reach everyone that needs to be informed. We've also talked about possibly having an interpreters present for populations that are not, English is not a first language. So we have looked at that. We've also talked about pamphlets, two-sided pamphlets, one side in English, one side in possibly Spanish or another language or other languages for mass distribution. And one of our members even proposed, let's engage with MTA to see if that's a means of distributing pamphlets and getting information out. We have talked about needing a budget for materials and for distribution. So at this point, we don't have a number for that. We anticipate having that moving forward, and that's one of the things that we are looking at. And Hannibal, is there anything, I'm sorry, Franklin, is there anything that I missed? Sorry about that.
No problem. Thank you so much. It's a great committee. We're thinking about subcommittees as well because of the sense of the work is so massive and the need to liaise with all of the other committees. So we're excited about the work, lots to do, thankful and humbled to be a part of this effort.
Thank you so much to both Karen and Franklin for their efforts. At this point, our committee presentations have concluded. And I want to really emphasize and thank all the committee co-chairs for jumping into this work. Many of them didn't necessarily have expertise in the area that they were tasked with heading, and they have picked it up so quickly and have moved with such urgency and just been so engaged and putting together these massive committees to work on these issues. So I really want to applaud them and thank them for their time, their commitment, their energy, and their efforts. At this time, I'm going to hand it over back to Attorney General Frosch. We're going to open up our discussion section and see if he has any words to start that off.
That's great. Let me add my thanks to yours, Rena. Committee chairs, we really appreciate your good work. You've been moving very quickly. That's completely appropriate. Some of the moratoriums or moratoria end in the next couple of weeks. Evictions, as we stand right now, will be back in court on July 20th and really open up on July 25th. So the speed with which you're acting is completely appropriate in these circumstances. And I want to say, our medium-term goal is to have recommendations ready for the General Assembly in December. But if we can get recommendations, proposals, and thoughts before then, we're going to be facing a rolling series of crises. And so having you get your work done or pieces of it done before December is extremely important and will be very useful. So thanks for the great work that you've been doing. Please keep it up. At this point, let's open it up to questions. If you have questions, comments, criticism, insults, whatever, let's hear them.
If I may, we had a sort of process question that came up in our committee, and that is, the governor's office is sitting on, we think, about $800 million in CARE funds. The 5 most populous counties have gotten another $700 million. And one committee member, Tom Lynch, who is friendly with the Frederick County Executive, reached out, and the county executive said, well, make the ask. So we need to figure out who is making the ask to whom. Should it be the committees? Should it be the head of the task force? Sometimes it matters who is asking. We've got a lot of really eminent people on this task force, but that was something we thought we should try to figure out. The second point is that the states that have been most successful in tapping into the CARES Fund jumped on it in a bipartisan way, and they had the state legislator, the governor's office, and the legal aid service providers all working together. We may need to build coalitions. For instance, getting the right to counsel for eviction cases may be more palatable if it's accompanied with rental assistance, so that the landlords will get on board as well as the tenants. And we may need folks on the task force to try and help us build those coalitions. So I just throw that out there.
Well, there are probably, of the 73 people on this call, there are probably 65 who know more about CARES Act funding than I do in the distribution of it. But it seems to me that at least from the perspective of this task force, there are there are several high priorities: legal assistance, food, and housing. And a lot of the CARES Act funding, I don't know how much, but a lot of it should be devoted to those things. And whether it's divided up by county or whether it's administered by the state or the judiciary, I don't know. But from my perspective, those are the three highest priorities I think that we're addressing from the task force. And perhaps our policy committee ought to be the entity that puts all the asks together and makes a recommendation as to what we should be asking for when we make the ask.
Attorney General Frosch, if I could be recognized, it's Mark Skirty with Maryland State Bar. You know, I want to compliment all the committee chairs and the really tremendous amount of work that you've done in a short period of time. And as I was listening to your reports, I was thinking about ways that the Maryland State Bar has committees and sections in place that could be a resource for a lot of your subcommittees, as well as your committees. I was happy to hear Danielle Crittenden from the Estates and Trust section report, and involved in that area, because a lot of our sections are grappling with a lot of the issues that are before this task force. In addition, I'm glad to see Pam Ortiz from the Office of Administrative Courts on the task force, because she is working with the Courts Access and Community Relations Committee that has self-represented litigants. So there's a lot of resources available of groups that have been really hitting the ground trying to work on some of these issues that have been presented today. And to the extent that we, the MSBA, can make ourselves available in ways to assist and help. I know one of the issues Matt Stubenberg talked about and others about the housing issues, Mr. Shaw, is how the courts are going to reopen for a lot of these civil hearings that are going to take place across the state. I know Chief Judge Morrissey is looking for uniformity across the entire state, so that we have the same processes in Baltimore City that you have in Washington County or on Anne Arundel. I really applaud the efforts, and just remind folks of this additional resources.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. We really appreciate your participation. And this is a partnership with the Maryland Bar, and we're grateful for the resources that you have put into this task force and the participation of many of the members of the bar. So thanks very much. Anybody else? Are you kidding me? We answered all the questions.
Attorney General Frosch, there was a question in the chat from Sarah Fresh. She was asking, will the Civil Legal Aid Funding Subcommittee be looking to identify funding for legal assistance for Maryland families who do not qualify for free legal aid?
Well, I think we might want to have one of the chairs of that committee answer, but my instinct is absolutely yes. I'm pretty sure we're going to have difficulty supplying responses to all of the needs of the people who do qualify, but there are lots of folks who don't qualify who have great needs as well. But does one of the chairs want to respond?
Susan?
Sure. Yeah, I had to find my unmute button. We have not specifically addressed that. As Attorney General Frost just mentioned, I think, we definitely have our work cut out for us to try to find funding to meet the need of those who are eligible. But what I would like to point out is that Maryland, at least funding that comes through the Maryland Legal Services Corporation, has significantly higher income guidelines than most other states. Indeed, currently, our income guidelines are well over 200% of poverty. They're about 220 to 235% of the poverty level. So at least, even if you're within the income guidelines, you're definitely getting into folks who are the lower paid workers. So.
I wanted to say thank you for all the work that has been done by all the various committees and subcommittees. It's mind-boggling, and looking forward to a final report and some results emanating from all the deliberations. There's one issue that we are dealing with right now that I don't know if any committee is looking at that specifically. It is purely a COVID issue, which is how do we return to the new normal in terms of staff? What kind of protections, physical, legal, etc. If you make staff come back, they don't want to come back. How about staff who have issues about, well, if I come to work and I can trace my infection to something on the job, does that open up questions of workman's compensation or other liabilities? What conditions should I accept to come to work? If you tell me you want to have a 50% level of work, what does that mean? How do I interview clients? Is the room big enough so I can have 6 feet apart? And these are really practical issues of coming back to an office where the idea you will interact with clients. So this is statewide, but legally, I don't know how other private officers are dealing with that, or the Attorney General are dealing with that, or whoever is dealing with that. But that's a real COVID issue. It's not over, and every day you hear new reports, like spikes in other states, and some states are saying you can't travel there. What happens if somebody travels to New York and comes back? And I know that, and they're in my office, what do? Do I quarantine them, or travel to Arizona? These are practical issues that are all COVID. So that's what I'm grappling with right now.
Wilhelm, I don't think there's a simple answer to that question. I missed some parts of it. It seemed muffled, but I think I got the point. And there is no answer across the board. I think we're going to be dealing with these issues one by one as they arise, as people try to reopen. Obviously, some states have made terrible mistakes in the way they've managed the crisis. They've opened, they're going to have to shut back down, or the pandemic will completely be out of control. And people rightly are concerned about going back in public, doing their jobs, going to an office, going to court. and some of the issues will be dealt with one by one, individual by individual. And I don't know, I mean, we're going to run into workers' comp questions. We're going to run into unemployment questions. We're going to run into health questions. I don't think that, I mean, our office certainly doesn't have the answers yet. We're going to be studying each one. I don't know where to put that question among the different committees that we have. But if it can be reduced in scope, it's a good one for some of our committees to look at. Maybe we need to chop it up and assign it to different committees. But I don't think anyone can know the answer to those questions at this point. Maybe somebody else has a better take on it than I do.
Right, so we have a projected partial return date of July 20th. We are working in conjunction with the court.
Yeah.
Self-help centers are back, and July 20th, they are full operation. So those are the real, I put it out there, not as a specific question, but to share with you the challenges.
Right.
The practical challenges.
Right.
And the major concern is, I've said before, who has less access to technology to get remote services? Poor people. And how do you maximize the services under the circumstances? That is the question. So any guidance that anybody, we have senior clients, we have a requirement that you must have 2 visits with your client in their home situation. Well, some of those home situations could be anything. How you deal with that requirement and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, there are clear due process issues if you are going to open up the courts on July 20th and allow evictions to proceed by Zoom. There are lots of folks who don't have internet access, don't have computers, can't go to the library, and there are problems in opening up the courts anytime. But right now, well,
we only have about 300 employees to figure out what to do with them. Different places, so that's the challenge. All right. I just share with you. We're dropping with it.
Mr. Attorney General, this is Tom Lynch in Frederick County. And can I go back to the process question for a minute? The COVID and care funds are being expended as we speak today. Frederick County announced yesterday $3 million for protection against evictions. So when we're talking about asks, there's an urgency to it. And so for instance, for our subcommittee and committee to structure an ask, we need to know who's going to speak for the committee, how quickly, is there letterhead? How do we go about doing this? If we need a ask next week, for instance, or tomorrow, who do we go to get that done? That's one question. And secondly, a lot of us have access to your colleagues in the state government, the budget secretary and others. We don't want to overwhelm by asking questions out of subcommittees or committees of this organization. How do we go about gathering information from the governor's office or Secretary Brinkley or whomever about what is happening with the state resources so that we don't overwhelm them with what they'll consider to be harassment calls and get the answer and get it to all of us? Right. Those are my process questions.
Okay, with respect to the second one, I don't think there's any harm in individuals asking public officials for information. It's not like our task force is going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back. They're besieged right now. I don't think us asking questions is going to make it that much worse. So I would encourage everyone to tap whatever resources we think we can find. With respect to the first one, it's something we hadn't considered prior to this call, or if we had it, it was above my pay grade. So Rena may have the answer already, but my suggestion would be that if a committee thinks that there is an emergent issue that needs to be addressed by the task force, that you be in touch with Rena or Judge Davis, and they will bring the issue to the attention of the task force. If we need to take quick action, we may be able to do a quick poll of the task force and come up with a letter, statement or whatever. Rena, do you have a different view of it?
Well, one thing we suggested in our committee was we have such an incredibly impressive group of people that constitutes this task force, plus the advisors. If we generated a piece of letterhead that demonstrated that, that has impact just from receipt of a letter from us that has everybody identified. Just the thought process of somebody that I like to market for money.
Right. Rena, did you want to add anything or make a different suggestion?
Yeah, I mean, we've given a lot of autonomy to the co-chairs, and we do expect that they would be sort of, if there are needs that come out of the committee, that they could be sort of reaching out. I like Tom's idea of the letterhead. The challenge with that is that we do have a lot of people on the task force and the advisory committee, so we will aim to make that happen. But I think that's a great idea. I do think that one of the things that that we have discussed in different committees is make sure that we are effectively leveraging everyone that has been brought together on this task force effectively. So sometimes, while committee co-chairs, of course, have the ability to reach out, sometimes it may be valuable to have another member of the task force reach out rather than them because of the personal networks, or for us to be strategic about how to do the outreach. And so I think a combination of sort of, informing me, Judge Davis, and then sort of, raising it and looking across committees and trying to identify even within the task force if there are messengers that could effectively relay that message, I think makes sense. What we want to do, obviously, through this task force is, we've brought all of these people together and we have a lot of folks who are interested in helping with these issues. I think as recommendations are now starting to pop up, we can look across the board and see how we can effectively use that. But I appreciate Tom's suggestion, and we'll certainly work on trying to get everyone involved on that letterhead. But I think that's great.
Yeah, and so let's leave it this way. If you've got issues, contact Rena. I don't think there's any problem with people reaching out, but maybe there's a more effective path. So you might bounce it off of Rena if you have a serious question, and if there is a statement that we want to make on behalf of the task force, then let us know. We can manage the size of the task force by using email, and we can let people make suggestions and, if necessary, vote. I think without a great deal of trouble. So we'll try to refine that process and perhaps communicate it to everyone within the next week or so.
General Frosch, this is Robin Murphy from Disability Rights Maryland. I had a comment, if that's okay.
Please.
And thank you to all the committees for all this wonderful work. And it's a privilege to be attending this with this group. But I want to ask people to be mindful of people with disabilities who have, as we look at equity issues, have been particularly hard hit by the COVID-19. A lot of inequities existed before COVID-19 came, and now there's tremendous just suffering because people with disabilities have specialized needs that are not being met. So one of the things is I hear all the committees talk about data. It would be really important not just to collect data on race and gender and demographics, but also on disability. And then I just wanted to point out also the importance of looking at the intersectionality between identities of disability and race, disability and gender, where the impacts of inequities are even compounded more. And so I just ask and recommend that people on the committees be sensitive to that. And the more data we can collect on that impact, the better we can respond to those issues. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Robin. Those are very good comments, and we'll take them into account. You're absolutely right. Let me ask Judge Davis if he has any comments he would like to make. Judge Davis, are you on the call still? Maybe we've lost him.
He said on the chat that he agrees with Tom's idea. So I'm not sure if he stepped off after that, but he was on.
Okay. Anyone else?
Hi, this is Marceline. Can folks hear me?
Yep.
Thank you all. This is a great discussion. I just wanted to flag an issue that we've been talking about in the Consumer Protection Committee, and I know it's come up in other committees as well, so I just wanted to raise it for a fuller discussion at a later time. But one of the things we're talking about is looking at mediation and online dispute resolution as a way to address the tsunami of debt collection issues that we're anticipating. But I hope as we're talking about that, we want to have a real conversation about what we mean by mediation and making sure that it's high quality mediation, because there are a lot of asymmetries in power for low income consumers if they arrive at the courthouse and are then trying to do a very quick mediation versus a more thoughtful, intentional process in terms of mediation. I know a lot of folks who went through the foreclosure crisis felt like we had mediation, but it wasn't always, there were still asymmetries in the process. So when we're looking at this from an equity lens, as we're talking about mediation, I just want to raise the idea of making sure that it's the way we do it is thoughtful and doesn't kind of continue and perpetuate those asymmetries of power for low-income consumers, especially consumers who have issues in terms of English as a second language, not understand the legal process, all the problems we often see. So I just wanted to flag that for a fuller discussion later.
Right. A great point. Anyone else?
There were several task force members who had put things in the chat. I wonder if they want to raise those questions to the full group. I know some of it has been addressed in the chat, but maybe the full group could also benefit. Senator Carter, if you're still on, I believe you had a question about credit scores.
Senator, if you're speaking, you're on mute, you're still muted.
If she's not on, this is Delegate Sandy.
I'm on. I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I apologize. It took me a while I had to scroll to find my mute button. So Marceline gave somewhat of an answer to the question, but as we talk about persons that are negatively impacted by the debt accrual due to COVID, and even once those situations are settled, whether it's falling behind on rent, falling behind on other payments, they're still going to be having long-term impact with their credit score, which, as we know, credit scores are often used to assess eligibility for rental housing and other sources of credit. And so I wanted to know what, if anything, we were looking to do with respect to not only the immediate resolution of debt and immediate housing needs, but the long-term impact on credit ratings based on the indebtedness. And my suggestion, of course, is that that's something that the committee contemplates as well.
Right. It's a great question. I saw Steve Sakamoto Wengel had a response, and maybe either he or Marceline can jump in here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Senator. You know, one of the things that we'd like to do is try to get people facing debt in touch with resources early on, you know, before it becomes a lawsuit and a judgment. We think that working with an organization like Consumer Credit Counseling Service of Maryland, Cash Campaign, and other resources can help them address that, so it'll have less of an impact on their credit scores and help them out of that situation, instead of having to face a judgment, having to face wage garnishments and other things that are going to have a more severe impact on their long-term credit. We are, you know, looking at how to connect people with resources early on before it spins out of control.
Thank you. That somewhat answers the question. Of course, that's not always going to be the case. And even if someone has fallen behind for several months in something, that's still going to be something that's likely to be reported. I still think that there's room to look at additional ways that we can help with that. But thank you.
Okay.
I want to ask a question. A lot of the different committees have come up with, you know, the lack of public awareness, maybe awareness raising as their first sort of collecting the resources, making them understandable for self-represented litigants or others who may be coming into the process for the first time. And, you know, it's coming out of different committees, but the need is the same, and they're going to be developing the materials. I'm just curious to know from the task force members, you know, sort of suggestions on how we think we can, you know, would it make sense for us to have, you know, one of the things in Maryland is that we have so many different ways in which people get this information. So the Public Awareness Committee is sort of going to be thinking about that, but also thinking about how do we bring all this information kind of in one place, or, you know, kind of have it available. And so I know there are many things that are already existing that are sort of outlets and aggregators, but I'd like to have a brief discussion on that, because it seems like many of the committees have identified that as their first sort of step. And so we can talk about that a little bit and get the task force's feedback on how we can approach that together.
Hi, this is Delegate Sandy Bartlett, and I'm going to mention something that may seem like a crazy idea, but it's not as crazy as it may sound. So, so Matthew mentioned a lot with respect to technology, and hopefully, I know that the technology or the data group will be working with public awareness, but you know, some of the counties already have use of apps. So that the information, emergency information can be reported immediately. I know Anne Arundel County has its app as well as a 311 app. And so I just wanted to encourage that to happen on a wider basis. I mean, it seems that we're at a point where almost everyone has a cell phone. And so I think we need to think a little bit outside of the box on how we communicate to people, and with possibly the help of an app. And then the other thing is, we talked about in our group about having almost like pop-up for all services, so that the services could be provided, support services could be provided at one location for all the various needs, housing, food, legal, at a specific location, at a specific date, and then it could pop up and move to another location, so that it's easily available to individuals who perhaps don't have transportation to get to various locations, or who might have not met the digital divide. And then, so that was one idea that came up in the Surviving Abuse, Exploitation, and Neglect Committee.
This is Pam Ortiz. I just want to mention that the Maryland Judiciary does have the Maryland Law Help app. I posted links in our chat. From the front page of that app, you can click to chat or click to call directly with an attorney at the Maryland Court Self-Help Center. And I do want to mention that I do think that the Chief Judge Marcy is considering providing notices on new eviction cases and perhaps consumer cases, directing people to start by calling the call center for initial information, assistance, and referrals, even before they come in or participate in their proceeding.
Thank you, Pam and Delegate Bartlett. Delegate Bartlett also posed a question in the chat about the HEROES Act funding.
I did. My question was, in case we have any members of the advisory committee from our federal representatives, the HEROES Act is super important for various reasons. And one reason is because it is a source of funding for landlords and to prevent eviction. So I don't remember the dollar amounts, and that's why I wanted someone from the advisory committee, if they're around, to talk about what it entails with respect to eviction prevention. So the landlords could apply for this funding so that they wouldn't have to necessarily evict individuals. So I wanted to know about the status of that and the likelihood of success of passing this important bill.
Cindy, I think all of our congressmen and senators are in session and not on the call, but I'll tell you what I think, what I've heard. It's passed the House. What I've heard is Mitch McConnell is not willing to bring it up in the Senate. Now, there may be pieces of it that get peeled off and passed separately, but I don't think we can expect that it's going to be passed in its existing full nature. I think the House is considering and perhaps likely to pass sections of it and hope that the Senate will deal with those. But, you know, we face the same potential barrier, the Senate not interested in providing the kind of relief that I think is necessary, straight up help for evictions and various other kinds of things. And certainly, you know, there's a big fight over additional aid to the states, which is absolutely imperative. If anyone else has a read on that or a comment, please jump in.
So thank you, Mr. Attorney General. Listen, the one thing I was wondering if perhaps and I'm speaking on behalf for another committee, and I apologize for that, but if the Housing Security Committee may be interested on behalf of the task force sending a letter to the U.S. Senate and requesting that bill get out of the drawer, as well as specifically outlining that eviction prevention piece, we don't have to talk about the entire part of the bill because that's where the controversy falls, but perhaps that one piece on that eviction prevention program could be highlighted in a letter to the Senate and specifically to the majority leader.
Yeah, well, so let's leave that to the Housing Committee, and we'll hear what they have to say. Anyone else?
This is Phil Huber with Maryland Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster. I serve as chair, and many don't know what Maryland VOAD is. It's the umbrella organization under which all of the non-governmental disaster groups in the state of Maryland gather and work together to respond to disasters in the state. Mine isn't so much a question, I guess it's a question, but also a thought. I've been doing disaster response work for 35 years, and I have wished for a group like this in every disaster that I've responded to, especially the long-term recovery efforts that we undertake. One example would be the long-term recovery effort that took place in Somerset County and in and around Crisfield, Maryland after Hurricane Sandy. And all of the issues that we are dealing with here are issues that come into play, albeit somewhat smaller because it doesn't involve the entire state in those kinds of disasters. But the need for legal aid in an ongoing way is in my mind, a really large need. And if there'd be a possibility for us to see beyond the COVID-19 disaster response to other responses that will be coming in the state of Maryland, and the ways that we can continue to provide support, legal support to residents of the state when disasters occurred, I think it would be a real service to residents. It would be a tremendous help to Maryland VOAD because we have the primary responsibility for getting communities to recovery. It doesn't necessarily rest with FEMA or MEMA, but that it is our resources that generally working with theirs that gets a community to recovery. Just in Somerset County, which is a fairly small disaster, we worked in that community for over 4 years to get them to recovery. So we're there long after people have gone and dealing with these types of legal issues that that adversely affect, in the same way in this disaster, these legal issues adversely affect those at the margin, those who are poor, those who don't have their own voice, and for which we need to become a voice for the voiceless. So I would just lay that before the committee, the task force work, and to think about how we have a life beyond just this response.
Thank you, Phil. I think that's spot on. And I hope that if we're able to do something with respect to this crisis, it can be used as a template for other disasters. And at the end of our work, that's, I think, a really useful process to consider what we have done, what succeeded, what failed, and how Maryland might use our work when the next crisis comes along. Unfortunately, I think we're going to be in this one for quite some time. And I, our original objective was, or ultimate objective was to give policy recommendations to the General Assembly. I think given the state of the pandemic at this point, we may just keep rolling after that, because I think we're going to see continuing issues that arise from the spread of COVID-19 in America and Maryland. And there may be a role for this task force for a much longer time than I think we originally anticipated.
Hi, Attorney General Frosch. This is just Trish Russell, Senator Van Hollen's Chief of Staff. I was wondering if I could just chime in. I couldn't remember how to unmute myself before when you were talking about the letter to the next package in the Senate and any action there. So I just wanted to chime in if I could.
Please. What?
Oh, wonderful. Okay.
Yeah,
thank you all for the work you're doing. I mean, it's incredibly helpful, and we're happy to be a part of it. So thank you, and a special thank you to the co-chairs. So basically, the latest that we've heard, and we continue to kind of pound on this. I mean, last week there were a number of efforts, like on the Senate floor, to draw attention to particular needs across the country in response to COVID, one of which being the being the need for rent relief and the mounting eviction crisis. And so we think the timing, the latest that we've heard, was that there will be something between now and August 7th. The challenge there is that the Senate is not voting, not back voting, as the same with the House, until the week of July 20th. These are 2 weeks that initially had been anticipated as non-voting weeks for the conventions. And then the Senate is back through August 7th, but the House is back through July 30th or 31st, I want to say. So I think that, I mean, obviously it's up to the Senate has some work to do, and we're trying to put a lot of pressure on Leader McConnell, and we hope that other senators in their time at home, where there's been a little lackadaisical to some of the relief that's needed, whether it's state and local aid or additional resources for communities as some of the key programs expire, or and other provisions from CARES. We're hopeful that they will have gotten pressure at home too and be more inclined to act. But happy to keep in touch with everybody here in terms of what we're hearing, and be helpful in terms of any outreach. Obviously, it's good for. We are happy to have Leader McConnell hear about this loudly. So happy to help the task force however we can, and I'm sure the rest of the delegation feels the same way.
Sorry, I forgot I was muted. Thank you very much, Trish, and please give our thanks to Senator Van Hollen for his great work. I think we've hit the 2-hour mark, and I think this is a good place to stop. I just wanted to thank everybody again. I thought the presentations by the committees were excellent, and the work that you all are doing is extremely important. And thanks to everybody who is on the call, member of the task force, member of a committee. Rena, remind me when our next meeting is. Is it September?
Yes, September 17th.
So we'll be looking forward to work results from the committees between now and then, but we will all gather again on September 17th. I just saw that Bill Horn from Senator Cardin's office weighed in saying that he agreed with what Trish had to say, and thanks Senator Cardin for us as well, and all the other members of Congress who are working for us on Capitol Hill. This is obviously, as I said before, a challenging time, made more difficult by the fact that I don't think we're seeing real leadership from the one place where it could make the biggest difference, and that's the White House. But we will press forward and do the best we can for the people of Maryland through this task force. Rena, did you have anything else you wanted to say before we end the call?
Attorney General Frosch, no, thank you. I wanted to thank you for your leadership and convening this task force, and really thank again all the co-chairs for their hard work. I think the urgency remains, and so we really look forward to many things coming out of this task force in the near term and then also in the long term. Thank you all.
All right. Thank you all very, very much. We'll talk soon.
Thanks all.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.